Dear students, welcome again to the course of Organizational Theory and Behavior. I'm your course instructor, Shehzad Khan Durrani, lecturer, Institute of Business Studies, Cohort University of Science and Technology, Hango campus. In today's lecture, we will talk about organizational politics. In our previous lecture, we talked about power in politics. So let's start. Our outline, it includes politics. We will try to define and understand the basic concept of politics. Then we will try to understand organizational politics. Then we will talk about the legitimacy of the political behavior. Then we will talk about the reality of politics. Then we will try to learn and understand individual factors contributing to political behavior and organizational factors contributing to political behavior. Then we will talk about the responses to organizational politics, and at the end we will talk about the global implications of political behavior. So let's start. We will start from the basic concept and definition of politics and try to understand the organizational politics. So let's start the basic concept of politics, right? So politics actually occur when employees convert power into action, right? So this means that power and politics are opposite faces of the same coin, right? So exercise of power actually is itself a political activity, and politics is nothing but the study of power, right? So organizational politics, what is organizational politics, right? So organizational politics actually includes the activities that are not required as part of the job, right, but that impact or that influence the way benefits and punishments are distributed within the organization, right? So it means it includes the activities, right, first one, that are outside of your job requirements, right, and the second one is that is actually required the use of power, right? So that's called the organizational politics. Next, we will talk about the legitimacy of the political behavior, right? So the legitimacy of the political behavior is actually based on sticking to the implied rules. When you are stick to the rules, right? The rules that are important. So they are actually of two types. The first one is called the legitimate, right? The legitimate political behavior we have. So it means that political behavior can take the form of legitimate, right? And what does it mean? It means that it includes the normal everyday politics, such as, for example, complaining, bypassing, or obstructing, right? There can be activities in the organization, right? For example, miscommunication between the two individuals, right, or between the two team members, right? Or it can include obstructing. For example, somebody can possess some innate qualities, for example, right? So because of his innate qualities, he may be disliked, right? So like because of his expressions maybe offends others around, right? So that's actually called the legitimate behavior. And the second type that we have is called the illegitimate, right, political behavior, right? So what does it mean, right? So it means the hardball activities such as sabotage, right, or for example whistleblowing, or maybe any symbolic protest, right? So illegitimate political behavior is more extreme and violates the employed rules, right, of the game, such as sabotage, as the example, whistleblowing, and symbolic protest, for example, it can be the example of the illegitimate political behavior, right? So what does it mean, sabotage, right? So it means the destruction of an employer's for example, let's say the property, right? Or for example, hurting someone or damaging someone, right? So you are trying to sabotage someone. And whistleblowing is actually the term used when a worker passes and information concerning wrongdoing, right? So the purpose of whistleblowing is to eradicate unethical behavior in the workplace, right? Or there can be other symbolic protests that can occur in the organization. So that's called the legitimacy of the political behaviors are of two kinds, like it is divided into two: legitimate political behavior and illegitimate political behavior. The next topic is the reality of politics. So let's talk about this one, the reality of politics. So politics arise in the organization because of the first one. The reason can be conflicting interests, right? And it can be one of the main reason, right? For example, the owner interest can be different, the manager interest can be different, right? Even, for example, the employees who are working in the organization, maybe their interests are different, so it can be the main reason of their conflict, right? Of the existence of the conflict between the two individuals, right? The second reason that can be the possible reason is the limited resources, right? So actually, for example, if the resources are limited, right, so there can be a competition for that, and it can lead to a conflict, right? And again, for example, it can lead to a political behavior as well, right? The next one, there can be an ambiguity in decision making, right? When there is ambiguity of role, for example, role ambiguity, when it's not clear, for example, or ambiguity in decision making, right? If the organization is taking the decisions that they are of ambiguous nature, right? So it can lead to a political behavior, right? Or politicking, that is twisting facts to support one's own goals and interests, right? It can occur as with such kind of behavior that people are twisting the facts just for to get their own goals or to get their own interests that they have in the organization, right? The next topic is the individual factors of contributing to political behavior. What are some of the individual factors that actually contribute to the political behavior? So let's talk about it. The first one, traits that encourage political action, right? What are some of the traits that can encourage the political action in the organization? And these traits are: the first one, high self monitors, right? People who wants to show others, right? Who cares about others voices rather than his own innate voice, right? Or rather than his own, the voice that is present inside him. He's not listening to himself, he's trying to listen to others, for example. So he's focusing more on the people's opinion, right, rather than his own thinking. So high self monitors people, right? And then high need for power, people who are so much of for example, hungry for power, right? So high need for power, such people, actually these are the traits that encourage political behavior, right? The next one, situational influence leading to illegitimate political actions, right? What can be the situations that can influence people or employees so that they can for example, possess some illegitimate political actions? And these are lower organizational investment, right? According to the research, if there is actually like a lower organizational investment, so it can lead to for example, an illegitimate political behavior, right? And for example, if there is a high organizational investment, for example, right, so it can leads to for example, it can actually reduce the illegitimate political behavior. Then we have greater the number of perceived alternatives, right? If there are more, like for example, alternatives to them, there can be less chances of illegitimate political behavior, right? And then we have the greater expectation of success. If people are expecting the success, right, then I think, like according to the research, it can lead to the it can reduce the illegitimate political actions. But if people are not sure, they are unsure about their success in the organization, then they can take some illegal ways, and they can actually take the steps that's called the illegitimate political actions. Right, the next one, we will talk about the organizational factors contributing to political behavior, and these are: number one, organizational resources declining or distribution shifting. Right, if the organization, for example, resources are declining, right, or the distribution channels, if there is any shift, for example, right, and it can leads to these are the factors contributing to political behavior. Opportunities for promotion exist. If there are opportunities for the people exist in the organization, so they will not, for example, possess the traits, for example, some negative traits, but they will have more positive traits, right? So if they have the opportunity, if they do not have the opportunities, then they will come up with some political behavior, right? The next one, organizational culture issues, and this is one of the main issue as well. Culture is different, right? So is the organization culture, right? So it means that people are different. You can find the diversity in the organization, right? So that's why you can see political behavior in the organization, just because of the organizational cultural issues, right? And it can lead to low trust. It can lead to role ambiguity if the roles are not clear. It can lead to zero sum reward allocation, right? If there is no reward, what they are doing, what they are striving for, right? If the two members of the treat are treating the same, though if one is working hard and the other is doing nothing, right? Then high performance pressure, right? And then leading by poor example, right? If it's not leading by an example but leading by a poor example, so it can lead to some political behaviors. The next one is responses to organizational politics. What are some of the responses to the organizational politics? So for those unwilling to play, right, for those unwilling to play or with modest political skills, right, or the outcomes are negative for them, right? So it means that there are people in the organization, maybe they do not have the interest in the politics, they do not want to be in the politics. Like most employees will not engage in a high level of politics, right, and often react negatively to politics, right? So what's happening to them? Moderate by individuals understanding of who make decisions and why they were selected, right? So they are actually moderate by the individuals understanding. They do not have the sufficient knowledge of the background of the organization. They do not want to involve themselves in the politics, right? They do not care like who make decisions, but they are just going on their own way for the organization, right? And why they were selected, right? Then when received as a threat, people respond with defensive behavior, right? And if they are facing the threats, then they are coming up with some defensive behavior, right? So their reactions actually include decreased job satisfactions can occur in such people, increased anxiety and stress, increased turnover, and a reduction in performance can occur, even though the given outcome for the individual employee who engage in politics may be favorable, right? It is often a negative impact for the group as a whole, right? So these are the responses, and the last one is the global implications of political behavior, right? And the implications of the political is the perception of politics, right? So the perception of politics is negative consequences are common, right? more like normally the people are using like the term organization politics is taking is negative, right? People are not using it for the benefits of the organization, rather than they are using it for their own benefits or for their own personal interests, right? Then preferences for power tactics, right? So differences exist consistent with cultural values, right? So it means that the tactics for the power are different as well, right? Because of the cultural values, right? So yeah, and the next one is the effectiveness of power tactics, right? So little evidence for differences, right? There is very much of little evidence that is present for the differences actually. So what does it mean? It means that politicking actually in the workplace is done around the globe, and the perception of politics seems to be consistently negative in most cultures. However, there is a difference between what power tactics are effective, right? What power tactics are effective, there is a difference, and it varies by cultural acceptance and norms, right? So there has not been a lot of research done to determine which tactics are effective in which culture, and there is an area still open to debate, right? These are the references that I use while making my slides. Thank you so much.